My name is Sloane. For the past 5 years, I've been living in a small coastal town in Scotland, a place where the North Sea mist feels like it can wash away anything you want to forget. I work as a freelance archivist, restoring old documents and photographs, bringing clarity to stories that time has tried to erase. It's quiet work, it's precise, it's everything my old life wasn't. To anyone looking in, especially to my family back in the States, my life was an oil painting of success. A prestigious fellowship had taken me abroad. My work was occasionally featured in niche academic journals, and my social media, when I bothered to post, showed curated snapshots of misty locks and ancient castles. It was by all accounts a perfect life, and no one hated it more than my sister, Kendra. Kendra is 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, she has existed in a state of perpetual simmering jealousy. While I found solace in books and history, she chased the spotlight. She was going to be an actress. It was always her one singular goal. She moved to Los Angeles with stars in her eyes and a suitcase full of my parents' money, ready to become famous. But Hollywood is a cruel town, and a decade later, she was still just a wannabe, bouncing between bit parts in student films and serving overpriced cocktails to the very people whose lives she craved. My perfect life, as she called it, was a constant source of irritation for her. Every quiet success of mine was in her eyes a personal failure of hers. Our phone calls were exercises in passive aggression. I'd mention a project I was excited about, and she'd sigh dramatically, talking about how hard it was to even get a callback for a non-dairy creamer commercial. She saw my piece as an insult. The distance, both physical and emotional, had been a balm for me. I loved my sister, or at least, I loved the memory of the little girl she once was, before envy had curdled her personality, but I didn't particularly like the woman she had become. So I kept my life in Scotland, and she kept hers in LA, and for a while that felt like a sustainable peace treaty. I thought the thousands of miles of ocean between us were enough to keep her ghosts out of my house. I was wrong. The inciting incident, the moment the Cold War between us went nuclear, didn't come with a bang. It came with a link in an email from my cousin, Maya. The subject line just said, Sloan, you need to see this. I clicked it. It was a link to a slickly produced promo for a new reality television show. The graphics were all soaring eagles and mountain peaks, with dramatic swelling music. A deep-voiced announcer spoke. In a world of cynicism, one show dares to celebrate the human spirit. These are the stories of people who have been to hell and back. This is Second Chance. The promo then cut to a series of tearful contestants, one of whom was my sister, Kendra. She was sitting in a softly lit chair, her face a mask of carefully constructed sorrow. And the story she was telling, it was mine. Every last, stolen word of it. She spoke of a childhood of neglect, of raising herself while our parents spiraled, of finding solace in old books because the real world was too harsh. She was spinning my pain into a compelling narrative for primetime television. She had taken my history, my actual, lived-in, scarred-over trauma, and was wearing it like a costume to get famous. I felt the air leave my lungs. The North Sea mist suddenly felt suffocating. She must have thought I'd never find out. She believed I was so disconnected, so wrapped up in my own little world overseas, that she could literally steal my life, and I'd be none the wiser. For a moment I just stared at the screen, at my sister's face, contorting into a facsimile of my sadness, and that's when my phone rang. It was an LA number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. A voice, familiar but aged by a decade, came through the speaker. Sloan, it's Liam Henderson. We had that disastrous intro to philosophy class together at Stanford. I remembered him, Liam, my old college roommate, a film studies major, who had always been kinder than he needed to be. Liam, I said, in my voice barely a whisper. Wow, it's been a long time. There was a pause. Yeah, it has, he said, his tone shifting from friendly to serious. Listen, this is going to sound completely insane, but I'm the lead producer on a new reality show called Second Chance, and I think your sister is one of our contestants. I just stood there, the phone cold against my ear, the promo video still looping on my laptop. I know, I managed to say. He let out a long breath. Okay, good, so I'm not crazy. I kept looking at her file, at the pictures, reading the stories she told in her audition tapes, and I just kept thinking, this isn't her story, this is yours. I remember you telling me some of this stuff late one night in the dorms. Then came the words that changed everything. The live finale is in 2 weeks, Sloane. She's a finalist. There's a $250,000 prize, and she's going to win. Unless you'd be interested in a surprise reunion, on camera. The silence that followed stretched across the Atlantic. Kendra hadn't just stolen my stories, she had sold them, and the man who bought them was now offering me a chance to reclaim them in front of millions of people. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. At that moment, it was about truth. He was offering me a second chance of my own, a chance to take back my name. My first reaction wasn't anger, it was a deep, hollow kind of shock that felt like falling. I ended the call with Liam, promising to think about it, my words feeling thick and foreign in my own mouth. I sank into the worn armchair by my window, the one that looks out over the gray, churning sea, and I just broke. It was a quiet, ugly breakdown, the kind that doesn't involve screaming, but a complete and total internal collapse. My body started to shake, a tremor that began in my hands and spread through my entire frame until my teeth were chattering. It was the physical manifestation of a lifetime of being erased, a feeling I thought I had left behind in America. Kendra hadn't just cherry-picked a few sad anecdotes, she had taken the whole tapestry of my survival and claimed it as her own masterpiece. She was monetizing the very things that had almost destroyed me, and as I sat there, the curated piece of my Scottish life shattered into a million pieces. My quiet home, my work, the very air I breathed, it all felt like a lie, a flimsy set dressing for a life I hadn't truly dealt with. I had run away from the ghosts, but my sister had caught them, put them in a cage, and was charging admission to see them perform. And then the memories came, not as gentle, faded photographs, but as vivid, brutal flashbacks. It wasn't a highlight reel, it was the raw footage. I remembered our childhood home, not as the warm suburban haven our parents presented to the world, but as a place of quiet, tense neglect. Our father, Mark, was a traveling salesman, gone more than he was home, and when he was there, he was a ghost in an armchair, smelling of stale motel rooms and disappointment. Our mother, Carol, was the architect of our family's dysfunction. Her love was conditional, transactional, and it was entirely reserved for Kendra. Kendra was the golden child. She was the pretty one, the charming one, the one who could do no wrong. If she got a C on a report card, it was because the teacher was jealous of her spirit. If she broke a neighbor's window, it was because the ball had a mind of its own. My mother constructed a world around Kendra that was free of consequences. I, on the other hand, was the scapegoat. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who was too sensitive. My successes were ignored, and my mistakes were catastrophic family failings. I got a scholarship to a summer program for young writers. That was nice, dear. Now could you please help Kendra with her diorama? It's due tomorrow, and she hasn't started. I was the built-in unpaid support system for my sister's whims. I remembered the time I was 12, and I'd saved up for months to buy a first edition copy of A Wrinkle in Time. It was my most prized possession. I kept it in a special box under my bed. One day I came home from school to find Kendra had taken it, drawn all over the pages with a purple marker, and gifted it to her best friend for her birthday. When I confronted her, crying, she just laughed. It's just a dumb book, Sloane. Lighten up. When I went to our mother, her response was swift and crushing. She told me I was being selfish. Kendra was just trying to be generous, and I should be proud of her. My mother then gave Kendra $20 to replace the book, a book she knew was irreplaceable. Kendra used the money to buy a new top at the mall. I never saw the book, or the money again. I just learned a lesson. My things were not mine. My feelings were not valid, and my pain was an inconvenience. Another memory, sharper this time, surfaced. The scar. I have a thin white scar that runs diagonally across my left palm. When I was 15, our father had come home from a particularly bad trip. He'd been drinking. He and my mother were having one of their cold, silent wars, where the tension in the house was so thick you could taste it. He was trying to fix the garbage disposal, muttering and cursing, and he got his hand stuck. He started to panic, thrashing around. I was the only one who tried to help. I reached in to try and free his hand, and he jerked away violently, my hand scraping against a loose blade inside the drain. The cut was deep. Blood was everywhere. My mother's reaction: she screamed at me for making a mess on her clean floor. She handed me a dish towel and told me to go to the bathroom and deal with it while she tended to my father, cooing over his traumatizing experience. I sat on the cold tile of the bathroom floor, wrapping my own hand, trying to stop the bleeding, listening to my mother soothe the man whose carelessness had injured me. I realized then that in the ecosystem of my family, I was not a person. I was a resource, and a disposable one at that. I pulled up the promo for Second Chance, again, my hands now steady. I scrolled through the show's official website, my stomach twisting into a knot. There were contestant bios. I clicked on Kendra's. Her photo, professionally shot, showed her looking vulnerable and strong at the same time. It was a masterclass in performance, and there in her bio was the story of the scar. When I was a teenager, it read, I heroically saved my father from a household accident, injuring myself in the process. It was the first time I realized that my own pain didn't matter as much as protecting my family. My blood ran cold. She had stolen the scar. She had taken that moment of abject, lonely terror and rewritten it as an act of heroic self-sacrifice. She hadn't just taken the event, she'd stolen the moral, a moral I had been forced to learn, in the most painful way possible. That was the catalyst. The shock receded, and in its place, something cold and hard and clear began to form. It was resolve. The shaking stopped, the lump in my throat dissolved. I looked at my own hand, at the pale white line that had been a part of me for over half my life. She didn't get to have that. She didn't get to wear my scars as badges of honor she never earned. For years, I had told myself a story that my family was just difficult, that my mother didn't know any better, that Kendra was just insecure. I had made excuses for them because the alternative, that they simply did not care about me, was too painful to accept. But there it was, broadcast in high definition for the entire world to see. They didn't just not care, they were actively profiting from my erasure. My quiet life in Scotland wasn't peace, it was exile. I hadn't moved on. I had retreated, and in my absence, my sister had become a professional grave robber, and my childhood was the tomb she was plundering. I stood up and walked to my desk, my movements now precise, deliberate. The archivist in me took over. It was no longer a messy family drama. It was a case, a story that had been falsified, a historical record that needed to be corrected. Kendra wanted a story. I would give her one. The real one, the one with footnotes, and evidence, and a final chapter she never saw coming. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the number Liam had called from. It was time to call him back. It was time to go to LA, and a quiet, steely thought echoed in my mind, a thought that would become my mantra for the next 2 weeks. It wasn't about revenge until it was. The phone call to Liam was short and clinical. I'm in, I said, my voice devoid of the tremor it had held just an hour before. What do you need from me? I could almost hear the smile in his voice. Just your passport and a plane ticket. We'll handle the rest. Welcome to the production, Sloan. He sounded like a co-conspirator, and in that moment, that's exactly what he was. He was my ally, the first one I'd had in this fight. He explained the plan. The show's producers, now that he'd alerted them, were in a precarious position. They had a finalist who was a potential fraud. If it got out that they hadn't vetted her story properly, the credibility of Second Chance would be destroyed before the first season even ended. They had a vested interest in controlling the narrative. My arrival wasn't just a personal favor from Liam. It was a necessary strategic move for the network. Justice for me was just a happy byproduct of good crisis management for them. I was fine with that. Their motives didn't matter. The outcome was all that mattered. Liam became my anchor. We spoke every day. He had been a good man in college, one of those rare people who actually listened, and it seemed that a decade in the cutthroat world of television production hadn't changed that. "I remember you telling me about your dad and the garbage disposal," he said on one call. "We were up late studying, and you were so stressed, you just started talking." I never forgot it. When Kendra told the same story in her casting interview, verbatim, like she'd memorized it from a script, every alarm bell in my head went off. It was a strange and powerful form of validation. Someone had listened. Someone remembered. My history wasn't just in my head, it had been witnessed. My second ally was my cousin Maya. Maya was my mother's sister's daughter. We had grown up together, more like sisters than cousins, until a family rift over our grandmother's will had pushed our mothers apart. Maya had always seen the dynamic in my family for what it was. She called my mother the stage director, and Kendra the star of the show. When I called her and told her everything, there was no surprise in her voice, only a weary sigh. "Of course she did," Maya said. "It's the most Kendra thing Kendra has ever done. What do you need?" Maya was practical, a no-nonsense paralegal who lived in our old hometown in Oregon. She was the family historian, the one who had ended up with all the boxes of old photos and letters after our grandmother passed. She was my secret weapon. "Kendra is telling stories," I explained to Maya over a video call, my laptop perched on a stack of books. "And I need to prove they're my stories. I need evidence." Maya's eyes lit up. "Oh, I can get you evidence. What's first on the list?" "The locket," I said immediately. "When our grandmother died, she had left me a small silver locket in her will. It wasn't particularly valuable, but inside were two minuscule, folded-up notes. One was from her, telling me to stay strong, my little oak tree, a nickname only she used for me. The other was a tiny crumpled piece of notebook paper, a note I had written to her when I was 10, telling her about a fight with my mother and how I wished I could live with her." Kendra was on the show, weeping as she told the host about the precious locket my grandmother gave me, which was tragically lost in a move. She was using the emotional weight of an object she never possessed. It was a perfect, provable lie. "The will is ironclad, Sloan," Maya said, her paralegal brain kicking into gear. "It specifically bequeaths the silver locket with personal contents to you. I have a copy of it, and I know exactly where the locket is. Grandma gave it to my mom for safekeeping because she never trusted your mother. It's in her jewelry box." This was the kind of detail that could make or break a case. It wasn't just that I had it, it was why I had it. Our grandmother had foreseen my mother's untrustworthiness. This detail added a layer of historical precedent to my family's toxicity. It was a subplot that had been simmering for 20 years. Next, I asked Maya about the photos. Kendra had told a heart-wrenching story about how all her childhood photos had been destroyed in a basement flood, a convenient way to explain why she had no physical proof of her own narratives. "The flood was real," Maya confirmed. "But it was your boxes that got ruined, Sloan. Your mom stored your things in the leaky corner of the basement. Kendra's stuff was on high, dry shelves. I remember because your mom made you throw out all your ruined yearbooks. You cried for a week." Maya went quiet for a moment. I think I might have some of your photos. My mom used to make copies of everything." An hour later, an email from Maya arrived. Attached were a dozen scanned pictures. There I was, age 7, with a gap-toothed smile, holding up a blue ribbon from the school science fair. Kendra had told a story on the show about winning that very ribbon. There was another of me at 15, my arm in a cast from falling out of a tree, a story Kendra had repurposed as her own tale of youthful recklessness. The final piece of leverage was the most personal, the scar. I couldn't exactly mail my palm to the studio, but I had the next best thing. I had the medical records. I had called the old family doctor's office, and after a bit of bureaucratic wrangling, they had faxed the records of my emergency room visit to a local clinic. 15 years old, laceration on left palm, cause kitchen accident. The notes were clear, the proof was undeniable. As Maya and I gathered this arsenal of truth, Liam was working his own magic in LA. He began the silent takeover. He couldn't directly challenge Kendra without tipping his hand, so he used his power as a producer to subtly probe the cracks in her story. He arranged a deep dive segment with the show's host, a charismatic woman named Isabella. "The audience is connecting with your story of resilience, Kendra," Liam told her in a meeting, a recording of which he later played for me. "They want to know more. The little details are what make it real." He fed Isabella a list of questions. They were my questions. "Kendra," Isabella asked, her face full of empathy, "you mentioned the locket your grandmother gave you. What was the engraving on the back?" "I watched the clip online." Kendra froze for a split second. "A deer in the headlights." "The locket had no engraving." "Oh," she stammered, recovering quickly. "It was so worn down I could never make it out. It was just her love, you know. It was a good save, but it was a lie." A tiny thread had been pulled. Next, Isabella asked about the science fair. "That blue ribbon you won in second grade, what was your project about?" Kendra smiled, a practiced, wistful expression. "It was a volcano," she said with confidence. "A classic, baking soda and vinegar. I remember the lava got all over my new shoes." My project had been about crystal formation. I still had the poster board with the rock salt crystals glued to it in a box somewhere. Another thread pulled. The panic began to set in. Just as Liam predicted, he forwarded me an audio file from a hot mic Kendra had forgotten to take off after an interview. It was a frantic phone call to our mother, Carol. She was asking me all these questions. "Mom." Kendra's voice was high and strained. "About the locket, the science fair. It's like she knows. How could she know?" My mother's voice was a low, urgent hiss. "Calm down, Kendra. You're spiraling. No one knows. It was years ago. Just stick to the script. You're the victim. You're the hero. Remember the story we practiced." Hearing my mother's voice, actively coaching my sister in this grand deception, was a different kind of wound. It was confirmation of the conspiracy. This wasn't just Kendra's desperate bid for fame. It was a family project. Our parents were in on it. They were producing her performance from the sidelines. The golden child had to succeed, even if it meant paving the road to her success with the bones of her sister's life. My resolve hardened from steel to diamond. This wasn't just about Kendra anymore. It was about dismantling the entire corrupt system of my family. I booked a flight to Los Angeles. I packed a small bag. In it I placed a folder. Inside was a copy of my grandmother's will, the medical record for my scarred hand, and a high-resolution print of a photograph of me, age 12, holding my first edition copy of A Wrinkle in Time, a photo Maya had found tucked inside an old album. The book Kendra said I was too selfish to share. I also packed the silver locket, which had arrived from Maya via express courier. It felt cold and heavy in my hand, a small, dense piece of the truth. My secret plan was no longer a plan. It was a reality, and I was on my way to the finale. The silent takeover was working almost too well. Liam's strategy was brilliant in its subtlety. He wasn't accusing Kendra of anything. He was simply asking for the specificity that a real memory holds. A liar can invent a story, but it's much harder to invent the texture of that story on the fly. Each question was a small pinprick in the balloon of her narrative, and it was starting to deflate. I watched clips from the show every day in my quiet Scottish cottage, which now felt less like a home and more like a command center. I was an ocean away, but I could feel the tremors of her panic. The host, Isabella, asked her about the cast I'd worn on my arm after falling out of the old oak tree in our backyard. "It must have been so boring being stuck inside all summer," Isabella said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "Did your friends come and sign it?" Kendra, who had never broken a bone in her life, launched into a touching, completely fabricated story about her friends drawing a huge, smiling sun on her cast to cheer her up. I just shook my head. My cast had been covered in quotes from my favorite books, which I'd painstakingly written myself with a Sharpie. There was no smiling sun. There was just a quote from Shakespeare: "The robbed that smiles steals something from the thief." I had been an oddly profound 16-year-old. The real-time fallout of these interviews was fascinating. Online forums dedicated to the show lit up with minor debates. Some viewers found Kendra's slightly vague answers endearing, a sign of someone still processing their trauma. But others, The more cynical ones started to notice the pattern. Her stories feel rehearsed. One comment read, "It's like she's reciting a book report about her own life." These were my people, the ones who could spot a fraud because they'd probably been lied to before. The true panic, however, was happening behind the scenes. Liam forwarded me another hot mic recording. This time, it was Kendra talking to our father, Mark. His voice, usually so distant and non-committal, was sharp with anxiety. "What do you mean you told them the science project was a volcano?" he hissed. "It was rocks, Kendra, salt rocks. Your sister was obsessed with them for a year. I had to drive her all the way to the city library to get a geology book. How could you forget that?" "I don't know, Dad," she wailed, her voice cracking. "I can't keep all of Sloane's boring memories straight. It's too much. Why did we think this would work?" "Because there's $250,000 on the line," he shot back, his voice low and venomous. "And because you deserve it, not her. You've had it so much harder, all her little successes, handed to her on a silver platter. That fellowship, the fancy college, she never struggled. You're the one who had to fight. You just need to sell it. Now pull yourself together." Hearing his words was like a punch to the gut. She never struggled. My entire life, my quiet, determined, often lonely struggle, had been completely invisible to him. Or worse, he had seen it, and chosen to ignore it, to rewrite it as easy. Their delusion was deeper than I ever imagined. They had so thoroughly convinced themselves that Kendra was the true victim and I was the privileged one that they actually believed their own lies. They weren't just deceiving the public, they were deceiving themselves. This realization was chilling. It meant they were not redeemable. You can't reason with people who have replaced reality with a narrative that serves them better. This was the moment the antagonist panic began to boil over. Kendra, fueled by my parents' desperate coaching, started to overcompensate. She became more dramatic in her interviews, her tears more frequent. She was laying the victimhood on so thick it started to look cartoonish. She gave a tearful monologue about the loneliness of her childhood, how she felt utterly alone in a house where no one understood her artistic soul. This from the girl who had a revolving door of friends at our house every weekend, whose every whim was catered to by our mother. The turning point came when Liam, under the guise of gathering supplemental materials for the finale, asked Kendra to provide any surviving personal mementos, a letter, a report card, a childhood drawing, anything to make her on-air biography feel more authentic. This sent a shockwave of pure terror through the family. They had nothing. All the physical evidence of the childhood she was describing belonged to me. This is when my parents made their first critical error. They decided to go on the offensive. My mother, Carol, managed to get Liam's direct office number from a low-level production assistant. She called him, not as Kendra's mother, but as a concerned party. Liam, of course, recorded the call. I listened to it on my laptop, the Scottish rain drumming against the window pane, a perfect soundtrack for the unfolding drama. "Mr. Henderson," my mother began, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I am calling about one of your contestants, Kendra. I am a family friend. I've known her since she was a baby, and I'm worried about her, and I'm worried about you." "Oh," Liam said, his voice perfectly neutral. "And why is that?" "Kendra has a sister," my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sloane, the poor girl, has always been troubled, deeply, deeply jealous of Kendra. She lives overseas now, and we've heard that she's been having some sort of breakdown. She's been making up these wild stories, trying to claim Kendra's experiences as her own. It's a classic case of Munchausen by proxy, but for a life story. If she were to contact you, and I fear she might, I just want you to be aware that she is not a reliable source. She is profoundly unwell." Liam let a beat of silence hang in the air. "Sloane," he said, his tone still placid. "Yes, I know Sloane. We were roommates in college, Stanford, class of 2011. The silence on my mother's end of the line was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality imploding. I could picture her face, the blood draining from it, the mask of concern falling away to reveal the raw panic beneath. "Oh," she finally managed to squeak. "Oh, I see. Yes, I think you do," Liam said, a hint of ice now in his voice. "Thank you for your concern, Carol. It's been illuminating. I have another call coming in. You have a nice day now." He hung up. The call was a declaration of war. They knew that their biggest secret, that I wasn't some distant, oblivious memory, was out. They knew the producer of the show was my friend. The ground beneath them had vanished. Their panic escalated from a quiet hum to a deafening scream. The fallout was immediate. The family exodus began. The linchpin was Maya. After I told her about my mother's call to Liam, she was incandescent with rage. "That's it," she said, her voice tight. "She crossed a line, accusing you of being mentally ill to cover their tracks. It's over." Maya still lived in the same town as most of our extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, who had been fed a steady diet of my parents' curated version of reality for decades. A reality where Carol and Mark were loving parents, Kendra was a struggling artist with a heart of gold, and Sloane was the strange, distant one who had abandoned her family to live in Europe. Maya decided to detonate a truth bomb. She called a family council, not a formal one, but a series of phone calls to our Aunt Patty, our Uncle David, and a few of the older, more respected cousins. She didn't lead with Kendra's fraud on the reality show. She was smarter than that. She started with the one thing they would all remember and understand, the will. "Aunt Patty," she began, "do you remember when Grandma Rose died, and Carol threw a fit because Sloane was left that little silver locket?" Of course Patty remembered. Carol's theatrics had been the talk of the family for months. "Well," Maya continued, "I just found out why Carol was so mad. Kendra is on some TV show in LA, and she's telling everyone that Grandma gave her the locket and that it was lost. She's using Grandma Rose's memory as a prop to win money." This was the perfect wedge. It wasn't about some abstract childhood trauma. It was about Grandma Rose, a woman everyone loved and respected. It was about a tangible object and a provable lie. The story spread through the family like wildfire. Aunt Patty called Uncle David. Uncle David, who had always had a soft spot for me, called my father, Mark, demanding to know what was going on. The walls were closing in on my parents. Their carefully maintained reputation as pillars of the family was crumbling. Suddenly, their narrative about me being difficult started to look less like a fact and more like a smear campaign. The cousins I hadn't spoken to in years started sending me tentative friend requests on social media. The family support system that Kendra and my parents had relied on was not just collapsing, it was actively turning against them. This led to their next phase, desperate counter-manipulation. Realizing they had lost the family, they tried to discredit me publicly. A small, obscure gossip blog suddenly posted an anonymous tip. The article was titled, "Is Second Chance as Finalist Kendra King the Victim of a Vicious Sibling Rivalry?" It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to poison the well. It painted a picture of a bitter, unstable sister living in self-imposed exile who was trying to sabotage her siblings' one shot at happiness. It quoted an anonymous family source, unquestionably my mother, who said Sloane has always lived in a fantasy world. It's sad to see her trying to drag her sister down into it. The article was so laughably one-sided that it barely made a ripple online, but it showed me how desperate they were. They were willing to burn my reputation to the ground to protect their lie. It was no longer just about the money, it was about their pride. They couldn't stand the thought of being exposed as the frauds they were. The final, most pathetic attempt at counter-manipulation came from Kendra herself. She sent me an email. It was the first direct contact I'd had from her since this whole nightmare began. The subject line was "Please." The email was a masterwork of manipulative drivel. "Sloane," it began, "I hear you've been talking to some people about the show. I know you don't understand this, but this is art. I'm an actress. I'm not stealing your life. I'm channeling our shared experience to create a character that can inspire millions. Our pain. I always felt your pain as if it were my own. Don't you remember how close we were? I'm doing this for us, for the family. This money could change everything for Mom and Dad. If you do anything to ruin this, you will be destroying this family. Don't be so selfish. After everything Mom and Dad did for you, that fancy college, letting you run off to Europe, this is how you repay them. Please, Sloane, for once in your life, think about someone other than yourself." I read the email 3 times. Our pain. our shared experience. She had absorbed the lie so completely that she was now trying to sell it back to me. She was gaslighting the one person on earth who knew the absolute truth. The gall of it was breathtaking. She called me selfish for wanting to own my own life. She framed my trauma as a commodity that she had the right to exploit for the good of the family that had caused the trauma in the first place. I didn't reply to the email, I simply forwarded it to Liam with a single line. For the finale, whatever you need. I took the silver locket out of its box and closed my hand around it. The cold metal felt like a promise. The charade was almost over. The power had shifted. They were flailing, panicking, and exposing their true natures to the world. I was calm. I had the truth. And in 2 days, I was going to walk onto a stage in Los Angeles and get my story back. The day of the live finale arrived with that strange, electric stillness that Los Angeles sometimes has. The air was warm, the sky was a hazy, indifferent blue. I spent the day not in a fancy hotel, but in a small, anonymous Airbnb that Liam had arranged for me. I didn't want to be part of the machine. I needed to stay grounded in my own reality until the very last moment. I laid out my evidence on the small kitchen table, the crisp printout of the doctor's report, the scanned photo of me with my book, the copy of my grandmother's will, and beside them, the silver locket. It was a small collection of objects, but together they formed an irrefutable narrative. My narrative. Liam had walked me through the plan. Kendra was one of 2 finalists. The show would proceed as normal for the first 50 minutes. Isabella, the host, would interview both finalists, play their journey packages, and then just before the public vote was closed, she would turn to Kendra. Kendra, she would say, your story of overcoming a difficult childhood has inspired so many, but we've learned that there's one more chapter to your story. A surprise guest who knew you back then, and who has traveled a very long way to be here tonight to celebrate with you. And that would be my cue. I wasn't nervous. I was strangely, unnervingly calm. The archivist in me had taken over. This was simply a presentation of findings. I had my primary sources. My opposition had only hearsay and fabrication. In the world of history, this wasn't a fight. It was a foregone conclusion. I arrived at the studio an hour before showtime and was immediately whisked away to a private dressing room, far from the main production area. Liam met me there. He looked tired but focused. They're in the front row, he said. Your parents, they flew in for the big night. They have no idea you're here. He handed me a small earpiece. You'll be able to hear everything on stage. When I give you the cue, you'll walk down that hallway and onto the stage. Isabella knows what to do. Just be you, Sloane. Just tell the truth. The show began. I watched on a monitor in my dressing room. I saw Kendra, looking radiant in a white dress, the picture of innocence and triumph. She was sitting next to the other finalist, a kind-looking man who had overcome a gambling addiction. My parents were in the front row, just as Liam had said. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, a perfect portrait of a proud, emotional mother. My father was staring at the stage, his face rigid with a mixture of hope and terror. Isabella was a master at her job. She built the drama, recapping Kendra's most heart-wrenching moments. They played a clip package. There was Kendra weeping as she recounted the story of the scar, her voice thick with emotion. The camera cut to my mother in the audience, nodding, a single tear tracing a path through her makeup. It was a symphony of lies, perfectly conducted. Finally the moment came. Isabella turned to Kendra, her expression warm and glowing. Kendra, she said, her voice echoing slightly in my earpiece. Your story of overcoming a difficult childhood has inspired so many, but we've learned that there's one more chapter to your story. A surprise guest who knew you back then, and who has traveled a very long way to be here tonight to celebrate with you. Please welcome, your sister Sloane. I heard the name. Liam's voice in my ear said, go. I stood up, walked down the hallway, and stepped into the blindingly bright lights of the stage. The first thing I saw was Kendra's face. For a split second, she looked confused. Then, as her brain processed who I was, her expression shattered. The color drained from her face. Her smile, frozen in place, became a grotesque rictus of horror. The audience applauded politely, assuming this was a heartwarming family reunion. Then I saw my parents. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father looked like he had been turned to stone. I walked calmly across the stage and stood beside Isabella. I didn't even look at Kendra. I looked at Isabella. I gave a small, sad smile. "Hello, Isabella," I said. My voice steady. "It's an honor to be here." Kendra was speechless. She was just staring at me, her mouth slightly agape. Isabella, the consummate professional, turned to her. "Kendra, your sister is here. All the way from Scotland." Kendra finally found her voice. "Sloane," she choked out. What are you doing here?" "Your producer, Liam, invited me," I said calmly, turning to look at her for the first time. The bright studio lights glinted off the silver locket I was wearing around my neck. Her eyes darted to it, and a new wave of panic washed over her face. "He and I were roommates in college. He remembered some of the stories you were telling, and he thought the person who actually lived them should be here for the finale." Gasp went through the audience. This was not the heartwarming reunion they had expected. My mother was shaking her head violently in the front row, mouthing the word no. Isabella turned to me, her face now a mask of journalistic seriousness. "Sloane, what do you mean? The person who actually lived them?" And so I told them. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I spoke with the quiet, unshakable authority of the truth. The story Kendra told about the scar on her palm. I began, holding up my left hand to the camera, showing the pale white line. "It's a good story, heroic, but it happened to me, and it wasn't heroic, it was just a lonely, terrifying moment in a difficult childhood. I have the medical records, if you're interested." I saw Kendra shake her head, trying to signal to me, to will me to stop. But I was just getting started. "And the story about the science fair ribbon," I continued. "Another lovely tale. But Kendra's project wasn't a volcano. Mine was. It was about crystal formation. She hated science." I looked directly into the camera. "My sister is a talented actress. I have never denied that. And her performance on this show has been her masterpiece. She has taken the most painful moments of my life and polished them into a compelling narrative for television. She has monetized my trauma, and our parents, sitting right there in the front row, have been her coaches and co-producers the entire time." The camera zoomed in on my parents. My mother looked like she was about to faint. My father was staring at the floor, his face grim. Kendra finally broke. "She's lying," she shrieked, standing up. "She's mentally unstable. My mother warned you. She's always been jealous of me." I didn't flinch. I just reached up and unclasped the locket from my neck. "This is the locket my grandmother left to me in her will," I said, holding it out for Isabella to see. "The one Kendra said was lost. It wasn't lost. It was just never hers to begin with." That was the final blow. Kendra crumpled. She sank back into her chair, her face in her hands, her body racked with shuddering, theatrical sobs. But this time, no one was buying the performance. The audience was dead silent. The charade was over. Isabella announced a commercial break. The moment the lights dimmed, network executives and producers swarmed the stage. Kendra was escorted away, still sobbing. My parents were quietly and firmly asked to leave. I stood alone in the center of the stage, the heat of the lights on my face. It was over. I had corrected the record. My new reality had begun. When the show came back from the commercial break, Kendra's chair was empty. Isabella stood alone on the stage and explained to the audience that due to unforeseen circumstances and revelations that had come to light, Kendra King had been disqualified from the competition. She didn't offer details. She didn't need to. The internet was already on fire. My name, Sloane, was trending on Twitter. The clip of my arrival and confrontation was already going viral. They awarded the $250,000 prize to the other finalist, the man with the gambling addiction, who looked completely shell-shocked but deeply grateful. After the show, he came up to me, his eyes full of a kind of weary understanding. "I'm so sorry for what you went through," he said, shaking my hand. "But thank you. Your truth gave my family a real second chance tonight." In that moment, the show's title finally felt real. I declined every interview request. I didn't want to be a media sensation or a professional victim. My goal was never fame or money, it was restitution. I had reclaimed my story, and that was enough. The day after the finale, I was on a plane back to Scotland. I flew away from the noise of Los Angeles, back to the quiet mist of my chosen home. The fallout for my family was swift and brutal. Kendra became a pariah. The story was too juicy, too perfectly karmic for the gossip machine to ignore. She was branded a fraud, a liar, a monster who had stolen her sister's pain for fame. Her acting ambitions were not just dead, they were buried in a tomb of public shame from which they would never be resurrected. The last I heard, through Maya, was that she had moved back in with my parents and hadn't left the house in weeks. My parents faced their own social apocalypse. The story ripped through our extended family and their community, their friends, their neighbors, the people at their country club. Everyone knew they weren't just the parents of a disgraced reality show contestant. They were the architects of the lie. Their carefully curated image of a perfect family was shattered forever. They were exposed as the manipulators they were. They lost their friends. They lost the respect of their family. They were isolated, left with nothing but each other, and their deeply entitled, now famous for all the wrong reasons daughter. There's a certain kind of justice in that. The three of them, who had created their own toxic self-contained universe, were now trapped in it for good. My life, on the other hand, began to bloom. Returning to Scotland felt different. It was no longer an exile, it was a sanctuary I had chosen and defended. My work as an archivist took on a new meaning. I wasn't just restoring old documents, I was honoring the truth. I reconnected with the family members who had reached out. My Aunt Patty, my Uncle David, cousins who were horrified by what my parents had done. They welcomed me back, not as the strange, distant one, but as the one who had been wronged, and the one who had been brave enough to speak up. I found I had a family after all, just not the one I had been born into. Maya and I are closer than ever. We talk every week, we laugh about the absurdity of it all. We cried a little too. Healing isn't a straight line. There are days when a pang of sadness hits me for the sister I once had, for the family I wish I had. But the feeling passes. It's a ghost limb, a memory of something that has been amputated for my own survival. And that brings me to why I'm telling you this story today. It's not to gloat, it's not to ask for your pity, it's to say that your story is yours. Your pain, your struggles, your triumphs. They belong to you. They are not commodities for someone else to exploit. Don't ever let anyone, not even the people who are supposed to love you the most, steal your narrative. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to correct the record, to stand in the bright, terrifying light of the truth and say, no, that story is mine. Blood isn't always thicker than water. Sometimes the most toxic people in your life are the ones who share your last name. And walking away, cutting those ties, is not an act of abandonment. It's an act of profound self-love. It's giving yourself the second chance you deserve. Thank you so much for listening, and for giving me a space to share this. It means more than you know. If you've ever felt like your story was being rewritten by someone else, I hope this gives you a little bit of strength. If you enjoyed this, or if it resonated with you, please give it a like, and maybe subscribe if you'd like to hear more. And I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim your own narrative? Let's talk about it. Until next time, be kind to yourselves and own your story.